welcome to another episode of Literary Gladiators, the show where we discuss debate literature in all of its forms. If it's written work,
it's game.
Let's meet the panel.
Hi, I'm Larry.
Jesi.
Ari.
And I'm Josh, and Ari is taking some pages out of Charlie's book.
Stealing Josh's lines.
We're going to be discussing a poet from the Harlem Renaissance in Claude McKay, and the poem that we're going to be discussing is The Harlem Dancer. And Ari, you have a discussion starter for this?
I do have a discussion starter about this. So, the Harlem Dancer is viewed by the observer as a woman with an attractive exterior, like a prostitute background, but he knows there's more to her than that. This is actually a two-part question. How do you think the idea of putting on a face gets shown in today's society, and what is this particular dancer supposed to represent in our own lives?
I think that you got to look at it from both the standpoint of the prostitute and from the people that are there, because first of all, I think that Claude McKay was well beyond his time when he made that straightforward remark about there being both men and women that went to see this prostitute dancing, and they were equally engaged. Mm-hmm. So the discussion about lesbianism in this poem definitely
and also bisexuality.
Yeah, I would say all of that definitely has to be on the table.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that you have this woman who she's there because she needs to make a living. And the people are there because they're looking to escape in some particular, in order to, in many cases, seeing a dancer, it releases their...
they can just forget about everything else.
Yeah, forget about everything. There's the two different sides to the coin of the dancer.
The business of dancing.
The business of dancing and the customers that obtain to it, and how
the consumer.
And there's also the place to take into account, because this is Harlem. It's just about certain that actually it is certain that the subject is a black woman.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's
a very, like, you read it and you're like, oh, this is just like what happens like now, but it's so, since it's 1922, it's much different. You have to look at it in a different light.
And what I kind of got from this too, being that, you know, the time period of the when the work was written and published, that I think that takes into account a lot. Going back to your question, you know, putting on a face, there was, at least my understanding of that time period and up until recently, it didn't matter what your opinions were. It didn't matter what, you know, who you were as an individual. You always had to put on the mask. You had to, you know, look the part always, no matter what. And I feel like she is described so well that she is doing what she's supposed to do, how she moves so briskly and how she just exudes sexuality, and everybody's entranced by her.
And yet there's more to it.
Yeah, and then as soon as you look into her eyes, she's not there. She's somewhere else.
Claude McKay does such a great job delving into the imagery.
He painted her so well, like, and that's the thing is I love poems that I love details in general for books, poems, short stories, anything. And I just felt like, you know, he painted the perfect picture of her. And again, you know, in my head, as soon as you looked into her eyes, she was not where she was. She was somewhere where she wanted to be, feeling, and it kind of made me even think, like, she didn't want to be there. She was there because she had to be.
And the only place she could be.
And she was basically hiding inside herself.
Whether it be from her own doing or from the doing of society.
Yeah, and
that we don't know.
She just wanted to hide from where she was, and she was hiding inside her own mind, and in her eyes, she was somewhere where she was happy, so that way she could continue doing what she didn't want to do. And that's how I kind of interpreted it.
Another possibility is that she was that, you know, her sexual appeal, right, was so transfixing to the audience.
Mm-hmm.
But to her, it's just like
Another day at the job.
Yeah, that kind of thing, where it's like almost like a muscle memory type routine. Like she knows what works, she knows how to work it, so to speak, and she doesn't even really have to pay attention.
It is so important, though, that especially in 1922, that someone can say, "I see something else in your eyes and beyond what you are showing me," while also understanding that what you're showing me is supposed to be done for a reason.
Mm-hmm. And the way that it's pointed, as much as the imagery paints something so beautiful, it's pretty much what he's describing here is somebody that is seeing and feels that they are nothing more than a piece of machinery.
And I think it makes it sad too, in a sort of way, because you know, there's tons of people in the world who are doing things that they don't want to do, and they do it because they have to do it.
They're forced to do it.
Yeah, they have to do it. And again, you know, as he was, and I'm going to keep saying painting because that's what I felt like he really did here, was he painted a beautiful woman, but he also managed to include and paint that tiny bit of sadness in her, and it just, so while she's exuding sexuality, she's also, you know, right behind it, like just in line, is that bitter sadness. Like,
and he did so much with so little. He grabbed you the first go round. Sometimes it takes a few attempts to get the message from a poem. This one did it right away.
It's kind of like a Vincent van Gogh or painting, where you have like the oils and you see the paint and you see the picture as that's a regular thing, but like you can see like inside the paint, like you can see the sadness and the tortured life that you live.
Like it's,
and you see much more as you go.
Now I want to make a quick reference here. I want to fast forward from this poem 44 years, so this would go to 1966. And I want you guys to think about how people wear masks and they put a face that isn't theirs. And I want you to think about the song by the Beatles, Eleanor Rigby. Because it's basically, you have Eleanor Rigby and she is putting on a mask. She is putting on a face. By the way, I have an individual video on Literary Gladiators for it. You guys check it out. She's putting on a face to go to places and try to meet people, but really she's just a lonely person inside. This is very similar, except this is a little more about like the job portion of it, where you have to do something. But it's not too different between the two.
Eleanor Rigby was also allegedly disgraced. She
disgraced and alone.
Yeah.
It's a slightly different backstory, but it's the same.
In a way, this is only. I think Eleanor Rigby was in her going through her twilight years. This subject, she was only beginning.
Yeah, she must have been like 18, 20, something like that.
Late teens, early 20s. Maybe even younger, but I'm pretty sure late teens, early 20s.
I hope it's not younger, but yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, and psychologists too, you know, since Freud, right, have been talking about kind of the fragmenting of personalities and things, where there's like, you know, different faces that you wear in your life, right, where you are, you know, when you're in public, right, and you're engaged with other people, you know, you have that kind of social veneer, and then underneath that is something else. And you know, so in the 20s, right, these ideas were just first starting to, you know, become popular.
It's kind of what I mentioned earlier about the introvert and extrovert, where like you go out and you're like, yeah, party, awesome, have a good time, and then you go home and you're just like that, you know, like you go and crawl up into a ball, and
or not even
just do whatever you do.
It's also too where, right, like in society you can, you know, you have certain expectations that you have to adhere to, but in your own private life, you know, you can be a little bit more free in what you think and what you say and what you do.
Yeah.
It's kind of the whole, I guess the theory, the keeping up with the Joneses, keeping up appearances. You know, when you go out into public, like you said, you have this, you know, you want to have this image that, you know, you want people to look at you and think a certain thing, which is why so many people will spend the money on the more expensive clothes, so that way they're looked upon and, you know, oh, I'm jealous, look at her and her fantastic clothes, or look at him with his nice watch and things like that. And then, you know, that's the face that you're putting on and going out. And I feel like everybody does that to some extent, because as you said, it's a whole psychology thing, you know, everybody does it. And I feel like he really captures, like, not just the dancer, but in a way that your eyes are the mirror to the soul. And no matter what you put on, no matter what face you're wearing, no matter your smile, whatever, you know, your eyes are going to give you away. And I think, you know, not just for the dancer, he kind of gives that away for everybody. Yeah. So no matter what we're doing, if you just can make eye contact for that one moment, you're going to know who this person really is.
I always say to people that jealousy is the one thing in the world that can never be broken. Like, you will always have it in some way or another, and because you have it, you'll always try and make yourself to look better than you actually are. So it's just what happens.
What do you guys make about the line about the gauze? Like, what's that about? Where it's like
the light gauze hanging loose about her form.
I pictured that as a like a sheer kind of fabric.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that much because usually dancers have something hanging from.
I'm trying to what is it called? There's like an actual name for it that I can't think of, but
I just call it a flap, but
tulle. Yes, tulle. That's what it is. That is exactly. I pictured that kind of like wrapped around her as she danced and flowing.
Okay.
I don't know. I thought it was.
That's probably. Yeah, I think like most of the lines are just describing what she looks like to come to the last line, which says, "But looking at her falsely smiling face, obviously that's the mask. I knew herself was not in that strange place." I like how he uses the word "strange" instead of
and in an instant
vibrant.
like that, you have to keep your mind off of a very strange place like that, because anything can happen. Somebody can come up and touch her inappropriately.
So at that time, you know, women weren't valued like they are today. They weren't really seen as equals. And I mean, even just, you know, several years ago, you know, and a little bit of my personal life, my mom was a dancer, and she used to tell me stories, you know, like there are things like if you left the club by yourself, you did not leave the club by yourself. And that's back in the 70s when, again, women were starting to be seen more valued. You just didn't do that because you could be killed, you could be raped, you could be hurt, you could be, like, anything could happen. So especially in 1922, you know, that was definitely something that could happen. And so, and I feel like that's what made it a strange place, is because here she is, this just, you know, beautiful, like, a forbidden thing that a man can touch on stage. As soon as she's off that stage, then what happens? So, and I think, like you said, the word "strange" is a really good word that he used, as opposed to.
And a lot of prostitutes, at least these days, have, you know, pimps and stuff. So they have their little.
At least they have the pimps.
What?
I just don't know what other word to use.
Already.
Prostitute management.
Yeah, prostitute management. I'll repeat the sentence. Most have prostitute management. Courtesy of Larry, leave that word there. There was no word.
I can't believe that.
All right, never mind. Forget I said that.
Correct you. Prostitute management.
Do we have any final thoughts?
This was a pretty good poem.
On prostitute management. I've got plenty of thoughts on that.
It's a great poem. It's wonderfully worded, and it's just a marvelous picture as to the face behind the mask and the feelings behind someone who is, you know, has mostly doing stuff because they have to do it.
I agree, and I think that going to your first point, the cliche, great things come in small packages, that can definitely be said about poetry, and this one is definitely, it's not an exception, but it's the rule.
I'm going to throw this out, is that I read this like recently, and I think this is actually one of my favorite poems of all time.
I'm actually going to, you know, agree with you there, and, you know, second that, because I mean, I read it real quick this morning as a, you know, kind of a fill-in. And I was like, okay, let me read this real quick. I actually read it twice. I thought it was absolutely beautiful. The first time I read it, I was like, wow, like, I didn't think I'd like a poem about a prostitute so much.
It's those last two lines. It's those last two.
That's what
the prostitute has substance, though.
Yeah, and you see her as a person instead of just a beautiful, like just a sexual thing in front of you. So it just, he just, gives this person a soul. And I think that's what really,
Good description.
brings
Good description.
this together. And I mean, don't get me wrong, even without the last two lines, I think it's very beautifully worded, but like you said, it's the last two lines that really, hit you. Like, this is not just an object. This is
Yeah,
a
the
human being.
meaning changes.
And there's so much to
Yes,
think about, too.
Yeah.
Hey, prostitute poetry is kind of a subgenre we've done before. Remember, what was that other one about the prostitute? What was it?
With Mary Magdalene.
Oh yeah, that one.
At
yeah,
church.
yeah, kind of similar theme there.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I'll say. Go back and watch the episode.
Alrighty. I may leave a link down below to that. I will also leave a link down below to this particular book, The Black Poets, a new anthology edited by Dudley Randall. This really isn't a new anthology because it came out in...
A long time ago. 1970.
Some of the poems were 1970. This came at...
First page.
Yeah, it looks like a long time ago. The most recent poems are from 1970. But already then.
And also make sure to check out my Eleanor Rigby individual video if you want to. Also,
Plugging it in with other stuff. I may leave that down below if I leave Mary Magdalene down below too.
Mm-hmm.
Be sure to join us next time for another episode of Literary Gladiators. For now, keep reading.
Yay. See ya.